This week on The Special Ed Strategist.
The first thing I would say to that is that being anxious before you perform is totally normal, right? So that distinction is really important. And we remind our athletes and performers. We do also see kids who have performances outside of athletics, right? Whether it's music or chess or all kinds of different things. But so I'll try to use the term performance interchangeably with sports because it really is.
And I would add to that sort of what we were saying at the beginning about anxiety, that in that failure and setback are normalized. And so it's just sort of one of the options that we go through. Like we have success, we have failure, we have average, we have great. So failure and setback, if you can normalize it in the same way you normalize anxiety, that it's not about getting rid of anxiety. It's not about never having failure. It's about how do you manage both when you have them.
One of the other things that happens in social media that didn't happen in our age is, when you're left out, you get it put right in front of you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Learning Essentials and our Cracking the Code to Special Education eligibility course. Empower your advocacy, erase confusion, and unlock the services your kiddo deserves. Learn more at learningessentialsedu.com. Hello, and welcome to the Special Ed Strategist podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Taylor. Welcome back to another episode. I am looking forward to our conversation today. A little bit different lens that we're talking about. We're talking about performance anxiety and pressure and mental training with our athletes that we are supporting within the school and within our homes. Talking with Dr. Chirby and Dr. Jones. So welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Before we dive in, I'd love to have you both give us a brief introduction of who you are, and always talking about that special education lens and supporting students and the special ed strategist. So how do you do that in your world?
Well, as you mentioned, our primary focus is working with athletes and athletes of all ages, but we do see a lot of student athletes. And many of our student athletes also have different learning needs or other kind of special needs that they have in addition to like their performance issues. So we see a lot of that in our practice, actually. We kind of use the example of, for example, a young 13 or 14-year-old boy who has ADHD and is having trouble focusing in the classroom is probably having trouble focusing in practice, right? Even though there's a physical element, there's a lot of parallels in terms of what we do and how we help kids. So we're excited to be here and talk about the synergies that might, overlap.
I would echo what Dr. Chirby said. My name is Dr. Ginger Jones, and we're super excited to be here. Before we got started, I went through the last year and a half and averaged out how many neurodiverse clients we have had, and we have had 73% of our clients, of which we have had many, have learning issues. And so that was a pretty interesting percentage. I didn't realize that it was that high.
I appreciate you taking that statistic because it does bring to light the importance of our podcast today and supporting the students that we see, either our personal students or students within the classroom or community. Before I start my podcast questions, I love to ask my guest one question, and that is, what is a little known fact, tidbit, hobby that relates to you and your world that really doesn't necessarily correlate to what you do every day on the job?
Go ahead, Dr. Chirby.
Well, in some ways this does relate, but hopefully I'll explain myself better. My favorite hobby, I have many hobbies, but my favorite one is snow skiing. And I love, love, love to do it. And I don't get to do it enough. But one of the reasons I love to do it is I've played a lot of sports in my life, I've done a lot of sports, but that is the one sport that consistently where I get into flow. And that's why I love it. So it does kind of relate to my job, but I mean, I would do it whether I had this job or not because I love it. So that'll be my answer for today.
It's so peaceful. I do not snow ski a lot. I've done it a couple of times, but I will say that it's interesting the perspective of people that really enjoy it. We took our boys to do it last year, and my middle son, who's a brain cancer survivor, I think he went down twice, and I got the feeling like he wasn't having fun. But then after lunch, he was like, that's the best thing ever. But he's like, but now I'm done. I think I'm going to just hang out by the fire. So, but it's a good way to get out and get that good air. So
Yeah.
thank you.
It's usually beautiful. That helps, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. Cold, but beautiful.
I would say something similar. Mine is also exercise, but mine's another form in the Pilates reformer world where I go there and I don't have it's so challenging for me that I don't have any other ability to think about anything else, which I love because it's the one place that I can go to just focus on myself and not any distractions that are around me. And it gives me a lot of confidence and I feel strong and I walk out ready to conquer the world.
The best. The best. All right. So to what we're our point today, understanding that performance anxiety. So we know that many young athletes experience anxiety before games or competitions. Can you explain the difference between like that normal pregame jitters or performance and then versus performance anxiety, I should say?
Sure. The first thing I would say to that is that being anxious before you perform is totally normal, right? So that distinction is really important. And we remind our athletes and performers. We do also see kids who have performances outside of athletics, right? Whether it's music or chess or all kinds of different things. But so I'll try to use the term performance interchangeably with sports because it really is. But that anxiety is completely normal and it's actually really helpful, right? So all of us have kind of an optimum level of anxiety to have our optimal performance, but there has to be some anxiety. And if you think about that, that makes sense, right? So even a test, you have to have enough anxiety about doing well on the test that you're going to study, right? But hopefully the anxiety is not so overwhelming that it starts to impair your performance. And that's the definition really it's different with everybody, but performance anxiety, it starts to become problematic when it's a problem, when it starts to interfere with your performance. So feeling anxious is not performance anxiety. Having anxiety that interferes with your performance, that's performance anxiety. So I think hopefully I answered your question there.
But then so how do parents then recognize the signs of anxiety? And I think kind of what we're going to end up hearing and learning about is that students with anxiety, it's going to impact them, like you said, in the school and the community and the home. But how can parents differentiate between a healthy pre-performance anxiety versus
Sure.
a deeper meaning?
Yeah. And some of it is in performance, right? If you have a student who consistently performs better in practice than in games, right? That's sometimes a sign that performance anxiety is present. But for parents, certainly some other telltale signs, physical symptoms is often one of them. So they complain of headaches or stomach ache before competitions, right? Sometimes you'll even hear stories of kids getting sick before competitions, right? That is more clearly problematic. But if you start to notice a trend, that's one. Behavioral changes, all of a sudden they don't want to go to practice anymore, or it comes time for the game and they don't seem excited at all, right? They're so nervous that they can't enjoy the process. Of course, if their performance, as we mentioned, is tanking, that's an obvious sign. But sometimes other signs, emotional signs like irritability. I mean, it comes out different a lot of times in kids and adolescents than it might in adults. But most parents know their kids. And so if they start to notice a trend of something related to their sport or their performance where they're emotionally behaving different, that can really be a sign. Kids will often have a lot of negative self-talk, and that's not necessarily related to performance anxiety, but it certainly can be, right? Like, I don't know why I'm going to play anyway. I'm just going to mess up, or my teammates don't trust me. I'm going to embarrass myself. That's one we'll hear a lot of times. Other subtle things like difficulty sleeping. So they'll be really having a hard time. They're a good sleeper, but all of a sudden you start noticing before a big test or a performance, they're not sleeping at all, or, kind of up all night, that sort of thing. So those are things parents might be on the lookout for.
How can parents, we talk about striking that right balance with our kids, right? So we want to, even in the classroom, you want to kind of push them to grow that capacity, but not push them over the edge. So how can parents strike that right balance between encouraging their kiddos' performance and not overwhelming them with the pressure?
I think probably the most important thing to keep in mind for parents is that they want to focus on effort and not the grade. for how they played versus the score of the game, not who won or lost, but just saying things like, I noticed how hard you practiced. I see that you're improving your skills. Really helps them to feel more motivated to do their best rather than focusing on the outcome. So if you're focusing on the outcome, they're going to focus on the outcome. If you're focusing on the effort, they're more likely to focus on the effort. But probably even more important to that would be to really identify for the child what their goals are, what motivates them, what are they looking for to get out of playing the game, helping them feel valued, having them reflect on how they're doing. And the best way to do that really is to ask those open-ended questions, allowing them to reach their own conclusions. Support is kind of a funny word, I think, because there's so many different types of support, especially in athletics. I mean, there's emotional support, but there's also financial support, there's technical support, there's practical support. And these questions are also interesting because depending upon the child's age, depends upon, how you apply different types of support. If you have a high schooler that is 11th and 12th grade and very invested in their sport and doing well, maybe the support is emotional support and financial support, but maybe not tactical support because they know way more than you do at this point. If it's a kindergartner, they need sort of all of the ranges of support. Also, providing constructive feedback, focusing on what they did well versus what they didn't. Supporting rest, which is really hard, supporting balance. One of my favorite expressions is, we don't cut a pie in half when we sit down to eat it. We cut it into many pieces. And so we want to encourage kids to think about their identity in terms of the many pieces of a pie. You're not just, an athlete and we're just going to have the whole pie. You're an athlete plus you're a student plus you're a friend plus you're a family member. So really encouraging their identity to have what I like to call is the pie mindset. And then lastly, avoiding your own projection and aspiration, which is of course a challenge for all of us, but really encouraging them to be the one with the microphone and you're just, in the background. It's about them. It's not about you.
I like how you said that. How do you guide parents then? Because we're right now on that focus of parents. How do we guide parents in the process if they're in a really high pressure community where it's a lot of comparison, a lot of you've got to do this, a lot of, fill in the blanks. So how do you help guide parents to navigate that in terms of, again, focusing on the student, the athlete, the performer versus the parent within themselves?
Yeah. Do you want to take a stab at that, Ginger? I have some initial thoughts too.
Go ahead. I'll add on.
We get this a lot, right? And it is challenging. We do, the DMV is a very competitive, fast-paced area to live and a lot of achievement oriented. But I think the key is in what you said, Wendy, in keeping the focus on the child's needs and where they are. And it's so easy to get caught up in the, if my son or daughter doesn't make this travel team, they're going to get left behind. It's the same thing we hear in our therapy offices of, I know they're overwhelmed, but if they don't take this math class, then they're not going to be on the track for next year. It's that same kind of, and it's really hard. It's because a lot of these kids are very driven, right? And have high aspirations and you want to support that, but you do have to encourage and help parents guide them to be the voice of reason, right? That there's only so much time in the day. The pressure and the expectations, they do take a psychological toll on these kids. And so you really have to pay attention and sometimes say no to things that your kids are willing or even want to do because you can just see that they're spread too thin, right? But it's definitely something we see. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Dr.
Sometimes I talk about it in terms of developmental stage and age. So I've had a couple of clients that, call and talk about, their elementary school child is now practicing with the high schoolers because they're so good. And, they're going to be the next fill in the blank. And sometimes it's helpful to educate them about just sort of brain development, cognitive development, developmental stages. Because if you can sort of logic your way with them, as opposed to just talk about their emotions, about how excited they are that their 5-year-old is going to be the next Simone Biles. Sometimes logic works with parents, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're too, anxious about it, which of course then leads to their kid. But I find that being really educative about boundaries and developmental stages tends to turn the light on for them, that they could take a step back.
Can we then discuss the importance of mental resilience in our young athletes and performers, and kind of help share some techniques that parents can use to build that capacity?
Well, that is precisely what we do. So we'd love to talk about that, right? And Mind Balance Sport, that is what we're all about, teaching mental resilience. And we do that through teaching mental skills. And that's really kind of Dr. Jones and I, our passion and our why for starting this company. We've both been treating youth athletes for 20 plus years in our therapy practices, doing sports psychology, but also doing clinical psychology. And increasingly, and we both also have, 3 children each who played elite youth sports and play sports in college. And so we feel like we've seen and lived it all, both sides of it. And we just increasingly felt like, why isn't anybody teaching these kids these really basic mental skills that build mental resilience at an earlier age, right? It's all translatable to every aspect of their life practically, right? And so it's getting better in terms of sports psychology resources. Almost all Division I schools now have a sports psychologist on staff or accessible to students, but it's still often, one sports psychologist for thousands of athletes, right? Like it's not really, it's not equitable or what I would say what's needed. But we really believe and have found that teaching the skills at an earlier age, and they're very teachable, is super helpful, and hopefully maybe even in some instances prophylactic, right? In that, if you can learn to manage your stress on the court or the field or in your piano recital, that translates to taking your test, a job interview, learning how to talk to your coach is the same as learning how to talk to your professors or teachers, right? So we absolutely believe in building mental resilience. That's exactly what we do. We do it lots of different ways, kind of some basic ones, like visualization, teaching mindfulness is a big part of what we do, helping kids with goal setting, time management, sleep. I mean, it kind of, it runs the gamut. That's a glimpse of what we do with our athletes and how it translates.
When we think about therapy, oftentimes it's some practices it's solo, some it's with the family. How do you navigate that? What is your recommendation or best practice when you have an anxious performer and then working with that particular individual and then bringing in the family? What is the best approach for building their resilience, so to say, and improving their outcomes?
I'm not a big believer in treating kids in isolation. So even if it's just an individual in the office, my mindset is always on families and the system that they're in. And so thus bringing the family in some way. It may not be, everybody's, 5 people are in the office, but if I can do it, I'll do it, because I think that the system that they're in perpetuates so much of how they are. And so if everybody can be together working towards these goals, and they're within their own specific roles in the family, then everybody is going to be better. Thus, the student and athlete will be better.
If we're aligning kind of resilience, overwhelm, setback, all of those things, how does anxiety then become a part of that you are seeing, and how are we then supporting that?
I think I'm on the same page. If I'm not, redirect me, but we definitely have athletes who come in, and they come in with the parents and the athlete kind of just, they just come in for performance improvement. They play X sport, they want to get better at it. These they see are their mental roadblocks. They come in, and we have many athletes that's what they do. That is their path. But we also have many that our providers identify as, you know what, I think there's more going on here. And that often is anxiety. Not always, but often, right? And the great news is anxiety is a treatable disorder, right? And we have resources in the community, and some of our providers are also mental health providers. So we have lots of resources to get kids connected to where they need to be. And that's been one of the things we feel really good about at Mind Balance Sport is we've I think identified a lot of kids who would have gone on longer and struggled much longer than needed to had they not come through our doors, even though that's not why they came through our doors. So that is a big part of what we do.
And I would add to that sort of what we were saying at the beginning about anxiety, that in that failure and setback are normalized. And so it's just sort of one of the options that we go through. Like we have success, we have failure, we have average, we have great. So failure and setback, if you can normalize it in the same way you normalize anxiety, that it's not about getting rid of anxiety. It's not about never having failure. It's about how do you manage both when you have them.
One of my phrases I love to use is win some, lose most. And it's true. It's true for even the most elite performers. If you average out all of their games, they've lost more than they've won, right? And it's hard for kids to remember that. But I think that also kind of normalizes that growth mindset and kind of what you were saying about anxiety.
What are some tips that you have in terms of along that same line in terms of fostering growth rather than that discouragement and building that mindset? What are some things that you have done that have helped kiddos and families?
Well, I think there's lots of answers to that question. One of the first things that came to mind, though, and I don't know, Dr. Jones, if you want to talk a little bit about this, but we also see a lot of injured athletes. And I mean, talk about a setback, right? That's out of your control. You tear an ACL or have a injury that really sets you back. And we do a lot of injury recovery work. We work with a couple of local clinics that see a lot of athletes for physical therapy. So that kind of came to mind. I don't know, Dr. Jones, is there more you want to say about that in terms of setback and injury recovery?
Just that we work in collaboration with the physical therapy, the orthopedic doctors, the team of folks in the same way we do in our clinical practice. We work with educators and teachers, and we're very much, part of a system to support with that, so that the sort of removing the isolation piece that we're alone with this injury or this problem that we have. We very much like to present it as we're all here together, working together to make it better for you.
But definitely normalizing setbacks in every way, because they are a part of the process. I mean, that's the whole rationale behind the growth mindset, right? And why we encourage athletes, for example, to, try that shot you haven't mastered yet in a game, because you're never going to get better at it in a game until you, start doing it in a game. And of course, you have to have coaches that support that, but it is part of normalizing setbacks.
What are the warning signs that a young athlete might be experiencing burnout?
So definitely decreased enjoyment. If you once loved the sport and now you're disinterested, or you don't want to go to practice, or you're complaining about the practice or games, you're tired, you're sort of tuning into your body more in the sense of where you've got a headache or a stomach ache, you are doing too much, you're overtraining, you're having mood changes, more sadness, more frustration, more anxiety. I think a really big one is, even though you're going to practice and you're doing everything that you've always done, your performance is decreasing and you're not performing as well without really a reason. That's a big flag. And then loss of motivation, not just back to that disinterested feeling. And burnout is really sort of the fuel that's sort of around them about, being better, pressure from coaches, pressure from within, pressure from parents.
social media can be that double-edged sword for our young athletes and offering that inspiration and pressure, both sides of that. How can parents navigate that space to ensure that their kiddos are having a healthy relationship with social media? That's probably a $1 million question.
I wish I had the $1 million answer, right? But it is an important question because it's so intertwined, ingrained in these kids' lives. And oftentimes their athletic identity is part of that, right? Something that's totally different in the last few years, certainly the last decade, but is a lot of their college recruiting happens on social media. Like you don't think about that, but they post their highlights reels and coaches are looking and watching and right. And of course, as we know, nobody posts their failures on social media, right? You don't post your worst game ever, right? That's not what you're looking at with all your peers. So for parents, really, it's about encouraging media literacy, right? Social media literacy, help at a young age, helping them understand that what they see online isn't the full picture, right? It's all only the perfect moments, and that's not what life's like. There's some books we like. One of them is The Art of Screen Time. That's a good one for parents. There's somebody on social media, Dr. Becky, who talks a lot about this, who's a great resource. But promoting positive role models, right? Who are they following on social media? Being informed about that. In lots of instances, especially with younger kids, setting boundaries around social media use, having discussions in your family, what the expectations are, how you're going to enforce those. Every kid is different, right? So families have to have different rules, but parents especially have to be good role models. Are you on social media all the time and scrolling, and is your child watching that? And what's the impact of that? Are you constantly posting? Does every life moment have to be recorded, but only the good ones? Those are important things for us to think about because our kids pay attention to that in some ways more than what we say, right? They watch what we do in a very subtle but profound way. But it is also important in terms of performance because the research is increasingly showing that it has an impact on performance. And the quickest one that I share with athletes is, they researched athletes who were on their phones looking at social media the half an hour, 45 minutes before their performance versus kids who weren't. And shocking, the kids who weren't did better, right? And so kids can hear it in that way sometimes, like, oh, not only is this just something that all the grown-ups say I shouldn't do, it actually has an impact on my performance. So getting them thinking about that, just having open conversations about it. One of the other things that happens in social media that didn't happen in our age is, when you're left out, you get it put right in front of you. And that's true in athletics too. If you didn't make the team and that team is doing well, you're watching all of it unfold as if you were there, but you're not. So really having conversations with your kids around that, I think, is important.
It's really difficult. I mean, just kind of walking through all this, right? So we have kind of the overwhelm, the pressure, the social media. Are we getting enough nutrition? Are we getting enough sleep? Are we able to manage the academics? So you can really see kind of where all of this would produce anxiety. And then especially if you have a learning challenge or, a challenge that's impacting executive function or attention, and how that all compiles and compresses and can really hit a not so positive end mark. So what are your recommendations for families that are listening that can then help our young individuals navigate this, plus social pressures and just, being social and friends, and it then becomes this big pressure ball?
My first reaction to that is, again, that's kind of at the heart of what we do at Mind Balance Sport, is trying to give kids tools and resources to navigate all of that. Because ideally, I would even say with few exceptions, even in the most elite performers when they're kids, like sport is supposed to be fun, right? Whatever their thing is that they're performing at is supposed to bring joy and fun and hopefully has a social component in some way, right? And when you get too far to one extreme or the other, you lose that. And I think all of the skills that we teach are not just about improving performance, but they're also about sort of getting back to that core of why they're doing it in the first place, right? I think for every parent, when their kid finds a sport or something that they enjoy doing, that's why we help them pursue it. It's not because, we want to torture them and make them do something they don't like. But then when they get good at it, right, then it's easy to get caught up in that, oh, well, and that's when things sometimes go off the rails, I think.
I also think that one of the reasons why we have had success working with these kids, and one of the biggest reason why we started this was because we wanted, as you listed down all those things that cause so much stress and anxiety, actually teaching and performing or practicing mental skills when we're talking about your sport or the hobby that brought you joy before or is still bringing you joy, hopefully, it's fun. So it's pleasurable to practice things that bring you back to that place where you were having fun. And so it's different than therapy, where we're coming in and we're sort of talking about things that are sort of problematic and they have more of a negative slant. With mental skills, it's fun, it's positive, and it's like Dr. Chirby was saying, it's the direct line back to, well, this is why I started this from the beginning. Like, how did I get off track? And we help them to get back on track. And it's easy to get off track with the environment sort of surrounding the intensity of it. And so our whole focus is to really reassert the fun and teach them how to do that themselves.
Can you give us some conversation starters or examples of the tips or kind of getting back to the fun for families? I think when you're in the forest and your family, it can often be hard to see through the trees, right? So it may be all of a sudden you're like, okay, and then you can step back and see all of this kind of building, right? But are there maybe some conversation starters or examples that you can share with us that parents can start to infuse to kind of either, kind of gauge where their kiddo is or kind of help them process some of this and manage some of this balance?
Yeah, well, I think, and of course, every situation is different, but in general, kind of at the heart of what you just said, like checking in with your kids. Is this still fun? Are you still enjoying doing this? Right? I think that's a great conversation starter. Like, what do you still love about playing soccer or playing the piano or, whatever it is? And getting them talking about that, getting them thinking about it is a great place to start. Anything you can do as a parent that fosters aspects of the sport that aren't about performance, whether that's getting together with their teammates socially or, you not focusing on the performance outcome, right? I talk a lot about the dreaded ride home with parents. Like there's this great study I love to cite. It was out in the Post actually a long time ago, but it was a longitudinal study over 30 years, hundreds and hundreds of college athletes and professional athletes. And they asked them, what was the one thing that you disliked most about youth sports or high school sports? And across the board, the most common response was the dreaded ride home after a bad game with my parents.
Wow.
Right? It says a lot.
Yeah.
It says a lot. And the flip side of that, when they asked those same athletes, what did you love most? Or what did your parents do that was most helpful? And they talked about this phrase, which kind of boiled down to, I love to watch you play, right? There's no performance in that. It's not, I love to watch you win. They already know we love to watch them win. That's fun for everybody, right? But I love to watch you try. I love to watch you, play. And so I think that study is really telling in terms of the way we communicate with our kids and how to model for them and have those conversations about getting back to why it all started.
And I also think with parents, teaching them that they can remove themselves as the one with the answers and communicate that to their child, that actually you're the one that was having fun. So we don't know the answer. You tell us how you want to have fun again, and really empower them with that. Versus, a parent saying, well, we could do this, or we could sign up for this, or we could, call this coach, or see if we can get on the same team as Bobby, all to, try to fix it. And there's so much that can be gleaned from giving them the autonomy to do that, including reinserting the fun.
That's terrific advice. I even just across the board outside of performances and athletics, of having the student or the kiddo come up with a solution, oftentimes just with my personal children or students that I support, do you want me to listen or do you need help with that? Just kind of having them self-generate, I think, is really powerful, as is having kind of that terrific support network. So how can parents effectively kind of communicate and collaborate with coaches, teachers, professionals such as you to ensure that our well-being and success is thriving and building and growing?
I think the key word there you just said was collaboration, right? Like parents really need to get involved. A coach is more likely to listen to you if you've started a relationship with them that isn't about what you're upset about with their kid, right? I mean, that's easy for all of us. But I also know parents are really busy and they don't have a ton of time. So some of what we do at My Mountain Sport, especially with our older athletes, is teaching them to advocate for themselves, right? Starting there. But for parents, the things they can do, right? Participating in, encouraging their kids to participate in, and things that are social with their teammates, if they're in a social sport, encouraging teams to utilize mental health resources, if that's, relative to what's going on. Of course, we're biased in that in terms of performance improvement, but we feel like all teams can benefit from that. And we hear from teams that they have a lot of fun with it, by the way. What else? Communicating a lot with the coaches is a big one. And something else I hear from parents, because playing time, of course, always comes up. We hear about playing time a lot. And I remind parents, like, at the beginning, you need to understand what you're signing your kid up for, right? Because most coaches, not all, but most coaches and programs will be really straightforward in the beginning before it ever starts, right? This is a travel team. We're going to play to win. Everybody's not going to play, right? But what parents hear is, well, my kid's one of the best players, so that's not going to be me, right? Until it is, right? Versus is your, what a more developmental team where everybody gets playing time, which particularly at younger ages, we support, right? Like it really should be about every players' development. And I think sports getting increasingly competitive and sort of cutthroat at younger and younger ages is not great for kids. So those are kind of my off the top of my head answers for that.
How do you help set expectations, either for the individual or the family, of where their performance level most likely will end? Not most likely, because we'd never want to stop somebody short of their capability, but how do we set the expectation that, hey, listen, you may, you have the skills, but it may not land you to a professional team?
Yeah. That's a tough one. It brings me back to a long time ago. I was the sports psychologist for Virginia Tech. And, D1 athletes, many of them have pro aspirations, but a small fraction of athletes go D1, and an even smaller fraction of that, I mean, it's less than like 0.5% of people, right, that play sports that end up professional. And it's really hard to have those conversations. And I think it's important to talk about that piece of the pie that Dr. Jones was talking about, right? When their identity is so solely on being an athlete, that's not healthy in any situation. And I think even top elite performers are seeing that more and more now, right? We kind of saw that in the Olympics. They started talking about mental health, and so, sports psychologists, and how their life outside of being an athlete, they realized how important that was. So that piece, I think, comes into that question a lot, but they're hard conversations, right? When the goals don't meet the physical abilities, that's hard for people to see. And to your point, you never want to discourage somebody or squash their dream, because we've all seen those stories where all along, right? I mean, Tom Brady's one of them, right? Everyone's like, he was getting 2 reps of practice in college and now he's the GOAT. So you got to be careful there, but you also, I think, in focusing on other things that are important in their lives, can help balance that a little bit.
I also think it's important for parents to talk about how that situation applies to sports, but it also applies to our entire lives, right? We don't get the job we wanted to get, or a relationship doesn't work out, or, some disappointment that we have that we're sure isn't going to end up that way. And so I think that parents can help their kids with that mindset, that flexibility of mindset, really, by illustrating their own examples, or the coach, can tell them something that didn't work out for them. But just sort of, again, back to that normalizing that situation is what everyone experiences at some point in time in their life. It's not just about sports. It's generalizable to, all of our pieces of our pie.
Yeah. And I think that's a great conversation to have in terms of these transferable skills, on the job, post academics, in school, all of those things, so that individuals can see that these skills that I'm learning here on the field do transfer to the classroom, do transfer to my real life in the community and so forth. I think that's important to navigate. If you had a magic wand to kind of sprinkle over the school's role and all of this, how can schools effectively either support their athletes, or what are some resources that you would like to see that people know more of?
It's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And probably bringing more awareness to that, and getting away from sort of the tradition. If you don't run a X minute mile, you'll never be blah, blah, blah. You'll never be, this athlete. But I think it's not one size fits all is probably what I would try to start with. And what does that mean to educators? Because they're probably more on the forefront of it than I would say the athletics, right? I mean, athletics is becoming more educated with neurodiverse kids. Awareness, teaching that there's not only one way.
And I guess I would say in that one size does not fit all, right? In that vein, just more communication, right? More open lines of direct communication between parents, coaches, administrators, teachers, kind of all of that, right? A coach who's struggling to, get through to an athlete, a teacher might have a better idea about who's in the classroom with them all day, might have a lot of really important information for them, as would a parent or, a sports psychologist. But the more people are collaborating and talking about, what works for a particular student, I think the better that is. And with that, hopefully comes more resources. So that, of course, my magic wand would be lots more resources, but.
So what specific resources or programs should parents look for in their kiddos' school, whether that's K-12? Let's just focus on K-12.
Well, it's not there yet, but we would love to see athletic departments have a sports psychology component. Just like we're pushing for colleges to do that, we would love to see that in K through 12. And I don't think that's a completely unrealistic goal. There's certainly high school teams that will work with a sports psychologist, but more as kind of that mindset that this is a resource that can help you. There's no taboo about it, right? It's not. So I didn't really answer your question, because that is not available or I've only heard of a couple of private high schools who have that resource. And I mean, a couple in the entire country.
Parents could ask for their K to 12 to hire us, and we could come into the school and we could do this for them. All joking aside, that is why we started this, to reach youth athletes, not college athletes, not professional athletes, because they're already experienced. They're already receiving these types of supports. It's the kids that aren't. And so that's why that's our sort of our niche. And again, the more we can spread awareness and teach people that these skills are not just for sports, they're generalizable. And as soon you teach them through sports, because that's what makes it fun. But then the magic happens when the kids are like, oh, I could actually use this same skill on my test, or with a friend that's, annoying me, or, a family issue. It all is generalizable. But to teach them in a fun way, like through the sport, that's the hook, versus teaching them because they have a problem, or some negative that they don't want to talk about.
So what roles can schools play in creating an inclusive environment that recognizes and supports the unique needs of our student performers, particularly those with learning disabilities or mental health challenges?
Well, certainly anything that supports inclusivity, right? Initiatives that foster camaraderie amongst all athletes, regardless of skill level. I think particularly in the lower ages, right? The culture of the school around that, I think, plays a huge role. Providing resources when necessary or needed. That's a big part of that, right? Kind of elaborating on what Dr. Jones said, if there's a student who's struggling, maybe not just to perform, but some might say kind of behave, right, in their practice or in their sport. And there's a resource in the school for the coaches or parents, right, to get assistance with that, to get help with that. So the kid isn't excluded from the sport automatically, which happens at times, right? The behavioral issues will keep them from participating when intervention might have prevented that. Those kind of things come to mind, but that regardless of skill level at a younger age, that's one of the big pieces that comes to mind for me. Is there a place for everybody to participate if they want to? Because so much by high school, that is not the case, right? Not through your school, that stops happening. And even junior high to some degree, but in the younger ages, like there's no need for, that doesn't make any sense.
As we wind down today, what is something I did not know enough to ask that I should have asked?
How about our tagline? Mental skills are just as important, if not more, as physical skills.
Yeah. I would definitely agree with that.
Can you encapsulate what that means?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can talk about Todd Rogers.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my favorite quotes. So Todd Rogers, two-time Olympic gold medalist for the United States in beach volleyball. His quote that I steal and love is, everybody has a physical ceiling. Nobody has a mental ceiling. There is no mental ceiling. And it's true, right? Like we always hear what a small percentage of our brains we use. So tapping into that part that we don't use and what a difference it makes.
And when you talk about the mental stuff, what do you like to highlight?
My favorite skill to teach that I think is most generalizable to all aspects of life, and that's probably because I use it in my own life, is mindfulness.
I would say we like to talk a lot about imagery and visualization, and Michael Phelps and Simone Biles have some really great visualization exercises on the internet that they do. And they both also talk about their struggles in academics and anxiety. And I think that to be able to visualize is a skill that is, back to that generalizable, so helpful for so many different things. And it's not just for a subset of people that have, get the best grades or, very traditional looking. So visualization for me.
If you had one tip for parents to put on a billboard, what would it be?
Mental skills are just as important as physical skills.
I agree. How can folks find you?
Oh, there we go.
MyBalanceSport.com.
All right. We will put that all in the show notes so folks can reach out to you with more questions. I appreciate your time and openness about supporting kiddos beyond the classroom and in the community and on the field. And so I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Special Ed Strategist. Remember, the right support can make all the difference. As your dedicated special ed strategist, I'm here to guide, collaborate, and empower your kiddos' success. Keep igniting potential one step at a time. Until next time, take care and keep strategizing. Today's episode is brought to you by Learning Essentials and our Cracking the Code to Special Education eligibility course. Empower your advocacy, erase confusion, and unlock the services your kiddo deserves. Learn more at learningessentialsedu.com.